To watch American primetime cop shows, you'd think that few murders nowadays go unsolved. And that's exactly when you need to remember those shows are fiction. The reality is different. Criminologist and Western University professor Michael Arntfield captures a fuller picture in his new book. It's called How to Solve a Cold Case and Everything Else You Wanted to Know About Catching Killers. And he's with us now on the line from London, Ontario. Michael, it's good to have you on the program again. How are you doing?
Doing well, Steve. Good to be back. Thank you.
Not at all. Let's start by showing a graph from your book, if we can, here, and I'll ask our director, Sheldon Osman, to bring this up. This is the percentage of murder cases in the U.S. that have been solved since 1965. Back then, more than 90% of cases were closed, meaning the police either found the killer or the killer killed themselves or something. It was resolved. But over the years, and I'll just describe this in a bit of detail for those who are listening on podcast, we see a clear decline in the line of cases solved, from 90% back in the day to just around 60%, a little over 60% today. Let's start there. Why the big change?
Well, nobody really knows. And to be clear, Steve, 2020, the Uniform Crime Reporting Program, which basically allows police departments to report their resolved cases to the Justice Department, began in 1929. And 2020, so nearly 100 years later, marked the lowest solved rate in history at just over 50%. So 1 in 2 murders going unsolved. So that decline continues, and there's a few reasons specific to 2020. Canada had the same issue, but in the United States, there's a couple of theories that I proffer in the book. Of course, one is that police have become over-reliant on methodologies and technologies such as DNA, and there's been sort of an erosion of traditional hard-scrabble, boots-on-the-ground detective work. Obviously, you can see the plummet really picks up right around the time that DNA comes into effect. So DNA is not the panacea that I think people think it is. The second theory is that, and we know this, murder numbers, murder stats traditionally have been really more of estimates. The Uniform Crime Reporting Program I just mentioned is voluntary in the United States, and several, and by several hundreds of police departments never submitted their data to the FBI. So when you see published homicide rates of per 100,000 people, those numbers reflect only the police department's reporting. What we've done at the Murder Accountability Project at murderdata.org is we've gone and found all of the blind spots throughout the country, and through Freedom of Information, obtained their historic clearance rate, added it to the federal clearance rate, and the numbers are worse. So what's happening is we have a fuller picture now, and the picture is that it's been declining.
Well, let's do an example from this side of the border. The Toronto Police Service says they clear 80% of their murder cases. Number one, do you believe them? Number two, is that a good number?
It's a very good number. And this is largely what we see in terms of the overall national average. Some police services have been and remain very effective in resolving and clearing homicides. But you have recurringly substandard, suboptimal police agencies, law enforcement agencies, whose clearance rates consistently 20, 30%. These add up and bring down the whole national average is what we're finding both in Canada and in the US.
And what do you think the Toronto Police are doing better than, say, other police services which are doing those things presumably worse?
It all comes down to resources, human resources, financial resources. We consistently see law enforcement agencies that prioritize, regardless of who the victim is, regardless of the political climate, who consistently prioritize and standardize their investigations will have a superior clearance rate. What we're seeing in some case studies in the United States, again, with these agencies that have 20, 30% clearance rates, number one, they have a tremendous number of murders, but number two, detectives don't even have access to a consistent vehicle and a motor pool. So they're often waiting hours just to be able to get to a crime scene. So something as simple as having an adequate supply of unmarked units, again, at the other end, the bigger picture is more effective police work and a higher clearance rate.
Michael, I suspect everybody thinks they know the answer to this because they watch American cop shows, but I want to hear from an expert what it really means. When you say a case is a cold case, how little progress over what period of time does a police service get to before they consider it a cold case?
Great question, and I think a lot of people want to know this. Cold case is really a cop and media coinage. It has no legal or forensic standing, but homicide scholars in general and law enforcement can, for the most part, have generally come to agree on a three-pronged criteria before you can use that term. Number one, the original investigator is no longer attached to the case. So there's a break in the institutional continuity of the case. They've either retired or died or been reassigned. The second is that there is no outstanding analysis or lab work of any kind that is holding up progress. You're not waiting on a DNA test. You're not waiting on a ballistics test. There's no paperwork forthcoming. And the third is that there has not been an update to what we call the murder book or the investigative chronology in over a year. There's been no interview in a year. There's been no recanvassing or nothing done on the case in 12 months. So you can see, using that criteria, a case could technically be cold in 13 months.
Right. All right. With that definition now in place, let's do a little clip from the book here in which you say victims and killers have different market values depending on where, how, and why the crimes occur. Welcome to Homicide Economics 101. Let's pick that apart, Michael. What do you mean by that?
Well, this goes back to what we were just discussing, in that we clearly see a two-tiered approach to the investigation of some murders. And some of this is beyond the control of police. And I've talked a lot about this with respect to the Nova Scotia massacre. And we see this as a consistent issue, responding to violent crime as well as investigating violent crime in communities that rely in Canada on contract policing, whether that be a contract fulfilled by the RCMP or the OPP or the Sûreté de Québec. In the US, I'll give you an example that is in the book. In Chicago, for instance, which has, as I think we all know, a tremendous violent crime problem. So much so, and the clearance rate is consistently so low that what was happening was disproportionately among people of color. If the victim's family could not be identified, or next of kin could not be identified regarding a murder victim in about 72 hours, and this was exposed in Chicago magazine about 10 years ago, this practice, those murders would be recoded using, again, uniform crime reporting to either undetermined or accidental. So those don't get reported as homicides to the FBI in order to artificially deflate the annual homicide rate. But what happens is, and there's a whole section in the book on this problem of what we call concealed homicides. That record never shows up anywhere. That case never occurred, not as a homicide. That victim wasn't counted. And what you've got is a killer that nobody's looking for because their crime has been coded as something else.
I want to ask you about an expression that we've obviously heard a great deal about over the last couple of years, and that is defund the police. And it has taken on, I think it's taken on a sort of broader meaning than the strict, narrow definition of, take the police's money away, in as much as it's let's fund the police to do other things, or let's take the money that we now give to the police and give it to other agencies who perhaps are better able to do that work. How does solving murders fit into the whole defund the police narrative?
Well, I talk a lot about that narrative in the book. And I'm a proponent for, as I mentioned in the pages of the book, a gut job. Use, retool, rebuild, redisperse a lot of the money more effectively. In terms of cold cases, I can count on one hand the number of law enforcement agencies in Canada that have a full-time, dedicated cold case unit that's properly staffed, and where investigators just aren't sort of dabbling in cold cases in the event that they have spare time. I think this is a tremendous opportunity, this narrative, to look at what police can do better and where resources should be dispersed. I mentioned previously, the clearance rate is directly tied to the financial and human resources devoted to taking homicide investigations seriously.
So what I hear you saying between the lines then is, if they got away with it, the chances are they're going to continue to get away with it. Absolutely.
And again, the definition of a serial killer, regardless of motive, I mean, most people think of serial killers as sexual predators, which many of them are. But a serial killer is just, regardless of methodology or motive, someone who kills two or more people in two separate incidents. That's it. So, yeah, these are people who have not been apprehended, have not been identified. And as I mentioned in the book, there's a particularly disturbing case in a suburb of Toronto where a serial killer came back to the same house 3 times and systematically executed members of the same family. And it wasn't until the third victim the police even realized the first 2 deaths were murders. They were both misclassified again to go to or to speak to concealed homicides.
Yeah, let's follow up on that, because when I read that in the book, I thought, that's crazy. How could this person not have been caught until the third murder? What kind of police work went into presumably declaring the first 2 deaths non-homicidal, which would allow this person to return to the scene of the crime, there's the 3 of them there, to return to the scene of the crime and murder all 3 members of this Harrison family?
There's another case in London with a serial killer who scaled the exteriors of buildings. And again, his first 3 victims were ruled accidental or undetermined as well. So this happens, I mean, it doesn't happen a lot, but is disturbingly more frequent than I think people realize. And what happens is snap judgments are often made in busy police services when attending these scenes. The coroner attends, sort of looks around, looks at the nature of the injuries. Homicide will come out, largely defer to the coroner. It's by the coroner's authority that the police are even there. And a judgment call is made, and a bad call at that. And then a second bad call gets made a year or so later. And just a lucky break for the killer, I suppose. And I mean, as I mentioned in the book, he must have been amazed after the second murder. Nothing's in the paper. No one's questioning him. And he was an intuitive suspect. These are all personal cause homicides, as we say. So the system has its issues, no question. And that's the whole inspiration for this book.
Yeah. Let's circle back to something you said earlier in our discussion about the over-reliance on DNA evidence right now to clear cases. And again, I'm going to pluck a quote out of the book here in which you write, "The fact of the matter is that DNA evidence has made murder investigations and, by extension, prosecutions something of an all-or-nothing proposition. Over-reliance on it to the exclusion of traditional investigative techniques is, however, believed to be one of the 3 factors that have led to a record backlog of cold cases and also to a record low murder clearance rate in the United States. It seems that DNA, for all the cases it solves, can play a negative role if relied on too much." Can you just amplify on that a bit again? And maybe in doing so, maybe tell the story of the murder case where it was the new shower curtain, not DNA evidence, but it was the new shower curtain that gave away the ghost.
Right. So let's start with DNA. A lot of the cases that are going uncleared have DNA, but there is, I think, this stigma around investigating cases in order to gather circumstantial evidence. The term circumstantial evidence is sort of a dirty word now. Well, the reality is, before the late 90s, that's how cases were solved. That's how homicides were cleared, before DNA. But what we see is, in many of these cases, DNA is only as good as having an offender to match a crime scene sample to. And there's many very disturbing, for instance, sexual homicides here in London that have DNA on file, crime scene DNA, and no offender has ever been processed into the system for the DNA data bank to make a match. They just sit on a shelf waiting for that person to pop up on the radar of the National DNA Data Bank. So, and this comes from interacting with and having been a police officer for many years. It's sort of, there's DNA, wait for the check to clear, basically. that leads to a blunting, again, of, I think, the instinctual investigative work that was done in the past. I give some examples of some cold case task forces that had no DNA and, again, returned to good old-fashioned detective work. Now, I should qualify that genomics or familial DNA is an absolute game changer. I mean, this technology is changing by the week, so much so that they're now referring to the DNA data bank that police have traditionally relied on as legacy DNA technologies, because the future is in leveraging, again, family trees through these private labs.
No, fair enough. We'll talk about that more in a bit, but I do want to hear the story about the shower curtain and the detective noticing the brand new shower curtain, and that's what ultimately got them to solve the case.
Well, there's a few. So this is a well-known Toronto murder. There's tremendous teamwork that went into this, and although the prosecutor at the time said that it was one of the more difficult cases to foreseeably or to bring to court, the offender in that case was Michael Briere, and he was one of several males spoken to by police doing a door-to-door canvass looking for voluntary DNA samples. He refused, which, given the circumstances of the case, murder of a small child, obviously was deemed to be somewhat concerning. He didn't make any sort of logical argument or put up the usual political gestures. So before police left, they also noticed that there was a clearly incongruous brand new shower curtain visible in the one bathroom of this small apartment. Crease marks still visible, totally not in keeping with the remainder of the slovenly conditions in which this individual was living. That's a clue. So this individual was placed under police surveillance, and ultimately it was determined that the old shower curtain that matched the rest of the apartment was used to wrap the dismembered remains of the girl. And really that was what broke the case, is that single observation.
Now, you talked about forensic genealogy a second ago, so let's pick up on that, because that was at the forefront of the solving of a very high-profile case, the so-called Golden State Killer. Let's start with Michelle McNamara. She was central to this story. Why don't you pick it up from there? So Ms.
McNamara, now deceased, this book was published posthumously, number one, coined the term the Golden State Killer. This was an offender that had multiple monikers and was poorly understood, and including by police, who didn't know that these crimes with different modus operandi in different areas could be the same individual, who was just varying his attacks. In some cases, he would murder the occupants. In other cases, he would just ransack homes. And at the time, the understanding of suspectology and criminal analysis allowed this individual, who happened to be a police officer, to get away with it. McNamara dug into this case with a level of rigor not seen before, coined a term that the media could sort of work with, and ultimately helped steward this series of cases, this mystery, toward a genealogist who really sort of made this the landmark case for using familial DNA, or what we now call genomics, and identifying an offender who's not in the DNA data bank, but whose relatives have participated in one of these family tree programs and have then shared that information publicly. And again, I don't think people fully understand this. People think this sounds very frightening, that you do ancestry and then the police could come to your house, or that this is instantaneous. It's not. It's months of work, and then the potential match needs to be corroborated by DNA obtained from a suspect, either by way of DNA warrant or by way of public discard, which is how they were able to make an arrest in this case.
Well, what was interesting about Michelle was she was not a criminologist. She did not have police training. She was a writer, and she was particularly interested in this case. And it raises for me a question about whether police services, whether police detectives either appreciate or would rather not have average citizens, journalists, sleuths on their spare time get involved in helping them clear cases. What do you think?
Well, she did ultimately partner with Paul Holes, who was a police officer, and obviously they had a partnership that worked out very well. I talk about this in the book, and I raise the question whether true crime helps or hurts cold cases. And the answer is both. I think true crime can serve a very valuable role, and McNamara's case being really sort of the paragon of this, serve a valuable role in keeping cases in the public eye, keeping pressure on police to maintain momentum, and ideally ferreting out new information, new tips, which we've seen in a couple of cases in the US. So I think as long as these stories are being told, preferably with some respect for the victims and with some degree of taste, there's some exceptions to that, obviously, and I mentioned them in the book. I think everyone is on the same team here. So McNamara's book is a great example of how, again, that interest in true crime, that earnest interest and a willingness to do the work the police don't have the bandwidth to do, assuming the police are willing to listen, can prove invaluable. And I mentioned also in the book, the Murder Accountability Project, we proposed in the United States and received bipartisan approval, never made it into law, but we're going to come back and try again, the Homicide Victims Families Rights Act, which essentially would allow the families of victims after a prescribed period of 10 years to require the police, by way of a motion filed in state court, to open up their files to an approved third party, whether it be a journalist, whether it be a group like ours, whether it be a university think tank, much like the one I run at Western.
Well, let me ask you about that. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and I want to get two more questions in. So, with that in mind, the Western University Cold Case Society is a think tank that you've founded, and I wonder if you could tell us how successful you've been so far in getting stuff cleared.
Well, it depends on the year. I mean, we started in 2011, and that same year, I think is one of our biggest successes, which is, and this is detailed in my book, Mad City, about a murder in Madison, Wisconsin, and then a series of connected murders at campuses across the United States. The main suspect in that case was located in New York City after fleeing Madison and absconded from what was supposed to have been a polygraph test in 1968. He had not been seen or heard from since, was presumed to be dead. And my students located him, and I mentioned this in my TED talk on this, called him, found a home phone number and called him and kept him on the phone and elicited a sort of tongue-in-cheek confession. The university, we had to come up with some rules after that. You don't call suspected serial killers if you're an undergraduate student. But that really sort of started us off and demonstrated that we could absolutely move the needle on cases using cutting edge technologies, which we've used in a recent case to narrow down where a body is buried again of a child victim. And then police have come to us just to peer review their cases before they bring it to the filing district attorney to say, will this hold weight?
Michael, I am saving the most bizarre question for the end here.
Okay.
You ready to go?
Hit me up.
Do you think you are so fascinated with this topic because your great-great-great-uncle was himself a serial killer?
I don't think so. Sam Gray, who owned the pub in Ballybay, Ireland, and also was the chief or high constable. So a pub owner who's the chief of police, strange combination. Yeah, we know of at least 3 murders committed by him. The local legend is that once the York Hotel, which he owned, which was the pub, was sold to new owners, that some bodies were found walled up in the cellar, which was known as the Black Hole among locals because other things happened there. But to be honest, no, my interest in this arose from the fact, and this is mentioned in my book, Murder City, As a child, I walked the same path as a boy named Frankie Jensen, who in 1968 was kidnapped and murdered, and the killer never caught, and it was a cold case. And we always wondered, was there someone from the neighborhood, especially, I mean, it was a very tight-knit suburban neighborhood. And the fact that he was always still out there spooked every kid who walked that same path, and really drove my interest in getting into law enforcement and getting answers and finding these people. And from there, I realized who this person was and that he was a serial killer. And the reason he wasn't in our neighborhood anymore is because he had moved away to claim victims elsewhere.
Gotcha. Well, I told you before we started, this book not only has academic excellence attached to it, but it's also absolutely fascinating for the lay reader, such as yours truly. How to solve a cold case and everything else you wanted to know about catching killers. And it's brought Michael Arntfield to our virtual studio tonight from London, Ontario. Michael, thanks. Good to talk to you again.
Thanks, Steve. Good seeing you again, too.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.